thank you two for joining us today. Really do appreciate it. So for those of you who don't know, Danielle and Michael are going to do a talk today on raising your first round of capital and how to tell a story with evidence and design. This will be a discussion, so if you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the Zoom chat or unmute your microphones. You should, fingers crossed, be able to do that. Yeah, you can. But without further ado, I'm going to let you two take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks for having us, y'all. Just looking at everyone here. Yeah, Danielle and I were thinking we'd make it Q&A after a little short intro. I'm Michael Gibson. As mentioned, I'm co-founder with Danielle of a venture capital fund. But what makes us kind of weird is that our backgrounds. Is if you looked at our resumes, you'd say these two would never be running a venture capital fund one day. Danielle, she can tell her story, but I'll just quickly mention that she founded a charter school in San Diego and was a school principal for many years. I thought I was going to be a academic philosopher. I was working towards a PhD and thought I'd live in a library. But a series of unlikely events.
You still live in a library. What are you talking about?
I still live in one. That's true. It's a long story, but somehow the two of us found ourselves working for Peter Thiel in 2010. And we helped launch the Thiel Fellowship on the founding team. And that was an incredible program back in 2010 because there weren't many people who said, hey, if you're a young first-time entrepreneur, founder, engineer, hacker, maybe you should be working on what you're passionate about instead of going through the ritual of taking classes just for the sake of taking classes, something like that. So we ran that program for 5 years. And in 2015, we just saw a lot of great things had come out of it. We helped launch Ethereum, the cryptocurrency. There's a company founded by Dylan Fields called Figma. It's doing quite well. He's in our 2012 cohort. And we thought, wow, we're helping run this nonprofit grant program, but we could be doing angel investing because we do all the work angel investors do. So in 2015, we pitched Peter. And he was excited to come on board. And then we had to raise money from about 29 other investors. And we were in business. So suddenly we were venture capitalists. And we've been in business for 5 years now. I mentioned this story not just by way of context, because it really informs how we evaluate deals and how we look at companies in the earliest stages. And when we started the Thiel Fellowship, we were too beholden, or we were in the legacy of college. So our application looked like you might see for a college or some kind of grant program that's affiliated with a university. We asked for things like your SAT scores, your AP exams, what your GPA is, and after 1 year running the Thiel Fellowship, we saw that this stuff was not relevant. I mean, it's like if someone's working on a tech project, you have to know they have the skills and know-how to build what they're building. And so that does require some level of let's just call it like knowledge or intelligence. But beyond that, man, the things you need to succeed in the wild are very different from the things you need to succeed within an institution, a hierarchical institution where you are, in essence, no matter what class you're in, you're trying to please some superior. They give you assignments, you turn them in, you take tests, everything is sort of dictated, and you just have to meet those demands. Whereas if you're out in the world and you're trying to create something valuable that someone needs or someone wants, that's just a totally different thing. And we saw that in the Thiel Fellowship right away, where some people had to go through this deschooling process because they were used to working inside an institution with clear gates and paths and ways of getting promoted. Whereas other people who might have been used to being out there in the world, they did better. So we quickly changed our application over time. We stopped asking for things like GPA, and we started asking more about, hey, tell us your story, what's your background? We realized we couldn't even use applications really. As I say, they're like fruit. They start off fresh and then get stale fast because, as you may know, in the startup world, maybe you pivot. It's like you have a glimmer of an idea, you pivot, and then all of a sudden a month later you've got 1,000 users and this thing's taken off. And so that's the kind of thing an application season won't be able to capture. And then the most important thing we realized is that it's just really important to get to know someone over time. And so an application is the snapshot of information, but if you know someone over time, you get a better sense of the things that matter. You get a better sense of how well how dedicated they are to something, how well they execute. The social aspects of starting a company start to come out over time, such as can you get co-founders on board? Can you work with customers? Can you work with investors? All those things require a social intelligence that's very different from learning from books. So that became really, really important to us, and really informs how we work with teams, that we love to know them prior to making an investment. We are not Shark Tank investors. We would never listen to a pitch cold, having just met someone and said, okay, we're in, because we know, is like anyone can have
to this.
Okay, we did do this once.
But it wasn't we knew the person. This was so shocking to me. Michael and I are sitting in a pitch. It was an old Teal fellow that we'd worked with for a long time, but we were sitting in a meeting with him probably about maybe 8 months to a year ago, something like that. And the founder only needed $50K to get started. And Michael and I believe that two heads is better than one in all kinds of decision-making and co-foundingship. And this founder sits down and tells us what he's doing. Michael's like, we're in, we're gonna do this.
Yes.
This is not our process. This is not how we do this.
Yeah.
And now we're 300K in deep with that company.
I know, we're in trouble. No, they're doing all right. They're just getting stuff. But yeah, that's my general overview, because I think it is interesting that we had to learn this stuff. It's not something where, I mean, sometimes we have our own investors and they say, hey, what's your checklist when you're looking at a company? And sure enough, we have one. I mean, we could tell it to you right now. But that's no good, because it's like a deep learning algorithm that hasn't been trained. We had to practice on 10,000 applications for the fellowship. We did thousands of phone call interviews, hundreds of in-person interviews, and then fellow selection. In a sense, we were working with Peter Thiel. That guy, I mean, he's one of the greatest angel investors of all time. So, hopefully we picked up a little know-how from him. But it's hard, because it's not articulable. It's not like we have these rules or recipes where we say, hey, you hit these marks, you get them. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Danielle jump in and add. And
I'm glad you talk so much, because I'm still waking up. I'm like, I'm almost there. My tea's almost sunk in. So yeah, I'll just say a few things about raising your first round of capital, because I know that is the topic of du jour. A few things is that I consider our job to be sort of experts, if you will, on what is going on in the market of startups. And my expectation on a founder is that you are the expert in the area that you work. It's like when we funded Swift with MLH, I didn't expect Swift to come to us and say, hey, here's what the market of startups looks like. Here's how I think we fit into that, and so on. I expected him to say, hey, here's what's going on in the hackathon community. Very much to what Michael was talking about knowing people over time. We kind of grew up with MLH, actually. So we started going to hackathons, and then this amazing organization sprouted that started kind of standardizing what was like, I don't know, protocol at a hackathon, where the bar should be, best practices. And so that was, gosh, I'm not even sure what year that was, probably 2013, 2012-ish, something like that. And so we got to know the team over time a lot. And when we started 1517 in 2015, when they were looking to raise some money, we said, oh, this is great. Like, we've seen what they can do. One of the things that we look for is to see people play in the field. So the analogy here is that anyone can have 3 good meetings with someone and like put on a good face and like talk measurably well about what they're doing. But that said, you don't get a sense for attributes that you really can't get on a piece of paper. I mean, applications try to get it, like things like grit and perseverance, all the time. They're like, tell us about a time you struggled. And then it's the humble brag where you're like, oh, I didn't think I could do the pole vault, and then I beat everybody. And you're like, okay, that's one story of grit and perseverance, but like, it's different to actually watch someone go through something hard. And that's one of the pleasures that we get to have, is that because we're working with people early, oftentimes before they even need money, we get to see how that narrative goes, how that story plays out of, hey, how did that team react to COVID? How did that go for them? Or, when the co-founders started fighting, what happened? And it's a when, not an if, and so on. But to go back to the fundraising round, I always talk to people about the days are long gone of that you would just meet somebody and they're going to write you a $500K to $1 million check. I think that's a very old narrative at this point. It's probably about 10 years old at this point, but it's still kind of stuck around where people think, oh, I'll just meet this person. They'll believe in me. I don't need any traction on what I'm doing. And they're just going to write me a check. The issue about that is, one, it did used to happen. There was so much money sloshing around that people were doing that, but that's no longer true. That said, every once in a while it happens in really rare cases, and those rare cases tend to be multiple time founders who already have relationships with those investors, kind of like the 50K moment we had with someone that we knew where Michael's committing on the spot and I'm like, hold on, wait, what are you doing here? But generally, when you're raising, there's multiple types of investors you would go to from the early stage. There's equity crowdfunding, there are angel investors, and there are pre-seed investors. Those are the three main buckets. Now, we're a pre-seed investor at 1517, and for us, pre-seed investors are going to have the highest bar for what they're going to be looking for, because we need to believe, I always say that VCs are kind of delusional. We need to believe that every company we're backing could be the company that returns the fund. And that's madness. In our first fund, we backed 40 companies. And that means we have to wholeheartedly believe that every one of them could be the company that returns money to our investors and then some. But the reality is that, many of our companies will do okay. And many of them will move on to other businesses and products that they make because what they're working on isn't working. And maybe one or two of them will be able to return the fund. So that means that we need to look for something sort of extraordinary. So there's a lot of people who come to us who have something like a smaller, medium-sized business, which is a great business. My first business was a tutoring company, so it's a smaller, medium-sized business. That said, it's not the type of thing that venture investors are going to look for. So there's this idea that you have to be doing something that could scale and become something very, very large for a venture investor to want to look. For us, when we're writing something like a 250K check, we're also looking for traction. So this means how much progress have you made in the real world? Traction is not, I've thought about this a lot. Traction is not, I've surveyed people. Traction is, I have this many people who are using it. And it doesn't have to be many necessarily. For us, we work a lot with B2B companies. And so we'll look for a pilot or two. We'll look for someone to come tell us, hey, I have one person signed off to use this. And we're like, oh, okay, that's neat. Now, Michael and we don't do very much consumer investing. That's one area where one person isn't going to convince us that there's a thing here. What we like to say is that Michael and I are not cool people, so we don't know what other people are going to think is cool. And so we don't have any sort of illusions on how consumer investing works at the earliest stages. I do think it's a lot of belief. It may be people who are used to that and are looking for, okay, these people have a growth strategy for how they're going to reach out to people. We don't have that, so we don't touch that area a whole lot. So those are a couple of things you need to know early on the VC side. If you're talking with angel investors, there's two groups of angel investors. There's angel investors who are really betting on your leadership's ability and potential. And then there's institutionalized angels. These are people who have on their LinkedIn profile that they do angel investing and things like that. They're going to be looking more at traction metrics and where you're going, and they probably want you to reach out to them because they're trying to become more institutionalized, whereas most angels are the types where you're not really going to know. You might only know that they're an angel investor because they've told you and you have an existing relationship with them. That said, it's also really hard to get money from angel investors because usually they want to know you over time as well. So if you do know people who could support you in your work, it's good to, show up and ask them like what they think about what you're doing. There's sort of this adage of like, ask for advice, get money, ask for money and get advice. I think that actually holds pretty true still. But I'm going to pause there. just for a
Well,
second.
yeah, I'll just maybe add a quick summary of how we evaluate things. So 3 main elements. The first is the team. That's what we've talked a lot about, is like, who are you? Why are you doing what you're doing? What do you bring to this problem? Why is it something you're working on now? All that kind of stuff. The second thing Danielle mentioned was the market opportunity. So that's like, hey, how big of an idea is this? Can it expand from the initial niche beachhead that you're on to a wider territory? And what does that look like? And those scalability questions. And then the third element, which is the least important, is the current state of the product. Because as you know and have heard, you're going to get information from your customers and users that's just going to change the nature of the product over time. So the team is the most important, because you got to be able to adapt, you've got to be able to receive that information and make those changes, and you got to be scrappy and hungry, because it's going to be a long road. It typically tends to be a 5-year to 10-year process to start a company. I mean, the greats out there, like Elon Musk, will tell you, he has a quote where he says, starting a company is like chewing on glass and liking the taste of your own blood. We've seen that. But I think in that sense, it's also very rewarding in the way that climbing a mountain can be, where, despite the difficulties and the challenges, at the end there is a sense of accomplishment. But it's not something to be taken lightly. So I'll leave it there, and would love to start taking questions.
I do have one question. I'm going to jump in, and then I apologize, I have to leave in a minute here. But so I would call myself an accidental founder twice over. My first company, I didn't start as a startup. I started as a side project that was something I thought should exist. And for those of you who don't know, prior to MLH, I started a company that was software to help people run hackathons. I think for Major League Hacking, when I left my last job, I knew that I wanted to start a company, but I started MLH as a side project too. This was not meant to be my startup. I was working on an open source analytics product, and Major League Hacking blew up out from under me, and I ended up, working on it full time, and have been very fortunate. But I think, probably for a lot of people in this group, and I'm sure a lot of people that you see in your community, you're encountering hackers who are working on interesting things that, maybe some of them are thinking that their companies, and probably many of them, I assume, are just like fun projects that people started working on that, fundamentally were interesting or, attractive in some other way to them. How would you advise somebody who's on that line, right? Let's assume the fellowship is a bunch of really talented hackers who are going to pursue interesting ideas across their entire careers. How do they know when something they're working on is worth turning into a company? And at what stage during that journey do you start thinking about funding? Because, I think today there's even more dialogue than there ever has been around alternative funding sources, whether that's bootstrapping or using debt instead of equity, things like that. And so I'm curious, how do you initially navigate that and say, yes, this idea I'm working on deserves to be a company? And then how do you think about when the right time to actually go and pursue funding actually is for, that idea or company that you're working on?
Yeah, first off, I would say we actually love to work with the accidental founder. People who come to us and they're like, I want to be a serial entrepreneur. I'm like, there's the door, it's over there. Because to us, what's important is that someone is super passionate about what they're working on. To Michael's point earlier about the Elon quote, it's the first 2 to 4 years of a company, if it even goes anywhere moderately successful, is all blood, sweat, and tears. That's all it is. The first question I tend to ask founders when they come into my office is, so of all the things that you could spend a lot of pain and suffering on, why this? And they usually smile and laugh and then tell me this story and a background of oh, this started as this kind of project, or someone in my family had this kind of issue, and I really wanted to solve it, or I love geeking out on this kind of thing, and it just kind of started going. We love that kind of story, because that personal intrinsic motivation is going to be the thing that has to drive you, because fame and fortune, it's not coming. It's certainly not coming for the first 4 years. And if it comes later, it's because you put in the work. It's not accidental.
We're very obsessed with the why people do things, the motivations. And one of the ironic things about the world of entrepreneurship is that the one motivation that is touted the most is the one that we think is the least valuable, which is, this sort of rah, you got to be courageous and start something and do the rebel path. And like, maybe that's like helpful to get people to take the first step, but it's not a sustaining motivation. It won't take you through those years. And the things that we have noticed that do are something like Swift said, this intrinsic curiosity where you're just tinkering on things and sort of finding your way. It's like Swift, I think you'll always be that way. It's like you'll always be doing things and finding yourself in new places. And then another type of motivation would be the people who are passionate about a single issue, a mission. It's like something deeper. I mean, with the case of Elon, right? It's this idea of getting to Mars to create a backup drive for the Earth. That's pretty, grand and and wild, but you can tell the guy is motivated by that, and it's a deeper level than, hey, I'm trying to find a cheaper way to send satellites up into orbit.
So to Swift's question about, so like, okay, if you're passionate, you're building something and you're making, how do you know when you should go for investment? What we always talk about is that, you want to see that you're building something that other people want, and that, hey, okay, yeah, other people are using this thing that I built. And you got to think for yourself, do I want to take this to the next level? Is there a place where I can go with this? I mean, for the story of something like MLH, I think maybe, and Swift, I'd love for you to jump in and add more, but it was like, you couldn't not do more. There was so much demand that you were like, oh, well, we have to keep doing this. So now, like, you were intrinsically motivated to start this thing, but then your customer base becomes this motivation for you to like pour gasoline on what you're doing. And then especially when more people come to you and you're like, oh my God, I can't serve these people because there's only me and John, and how are we going to do? And like, you're like, okay, well, we need money to build a team, and we need this to do that, and so on. It's like this sort of feedback loop of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation from your customers. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Swift.
That's definitely true, right? I mean, even like taking the fellowship as a microcosm of that experience, right? We got 20,000 applications for students to participate in this program. And, our team interviewed 2,500 people on the phone for this program, and narrowed it down to, 150 who are going to be in it. Right. And like, I think, it's heartbreaking to not be able to accept all 20,000 of those people. Right. Like, fundamentally, I believe that what the service that we're offering to fellows here, and the sense of, the opportunity to work on interesting projects under the supervision of somebody who's taking a vested interest in their like technical growth, and to help them build a network that's, super valuable, impactful. Like, everybody deserves that. But it's like one of those things where it's like funding, I guess, is fundamentally the thing that lets us support a certain number of people. Yeah. I think MLH's story has always been that, right? Our community has always grown faster than, our team and our customer base and all of those things. And they often lag like slightly behind. But yeah, I think fundamentally raising money let us grow. But let us take bets, right? Like, we saw the community where it was going, and let us hire a team to support the growth of the community. And ultimately, we found customers to get us there to support that. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, it's a really good time to know is like when you don't have the resources, whether that's time, money, or something else, to be able to do what you want to do. That's probably a really good time.
One of the ways that we say the time to raise money is that we think about raising capital as a way to run experiments that you can't run without it. And so sometimes founders have come into our office and they're like, oh, well, with this capital, I'm going to hire a salesperson, and then we're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to be able to get that first pilot. And I'm like, guess what? Guess who the salesperson is? It's you. And it's going to be you as the founder you're going to be the closer for at least the first 3, if not the first 4 years, maybe even longer. Even if you have a sales team, everybody wants to talk to the founder in the end to do the close, because you know the most. Not only do you know the most, but you have the most confidence, you have the most conviction about what you're doing. And so I told that team, I was like, no, you have a phone. The experiment you can run on the cheap is making those cold calls to potential customers. And I want to see that before I put money in. So when you come to an investor, we want to see that you've run all the experiments you possibly can as cheaply as possible, and that this money is going to let you run the experiment that you can't do without it. But if there's experimentation you can do without the money, I don't want to pay for that. Nobody wants to pay for that.
Yeah. A couple of things I just want to emphasize on this is, one, what Swift and Danielle said. Danielle's dynamic of the extrinsic fueling the intrinsic, and then coming back, this little flywheel in terms of your your passion. Is like the rhetoric around passion is like, oh, follow your passion. But what we've seen is sometimes when you get that engagement and absorption with the external world through your customers, it's like your passion increases. So sometimes it starts off, you're like just kind of curious, and then you tap into something and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I am jazzed by this. So don't be afraid to experiment like that. The second thing is like, yeah, just to reiterate what Danielle was saying, when we have these 1K grants we give out, when we listen to those people talking, kind of pitching us on that, we want to hear an itemized list of what they need to buy. Hey, I just need to buy X, Y, and Z, and it's about $800. And then we're like, perfect. Okay, 1K grant. If we think of the pre-seed, it's like, hey, I need to hire this person, that person. But the added element is like with fundraising, you're always trying to get to the next round of financing. And part of that story with the experiments that you want to run is, hey, we're going to run these experiments. We're going to hire these people to do it. And then in 8 months to a year, our company's going to look like this. Here's the plan. And then we're going to raise more money, and it's going to be based on, this key performance metric, something like that. So like the plans tend to get really concrete is what I wanted to emphasize on that, is you start to think really about, who am I going to hire? How am I going to spend this money?
One thing I want to put up before we take more questions too is that we've talked about our 1K grant and our 250K check, but actually we just launched something about a week and a half ago called Invisible College, where we're offering teams a 50K investment to get started on something that is more in the very beginning, pre-pilot, pre-product stage, for people who are thinking about taking the fall semester off to build, ideally it would be to build a company, but I don't even like to say that because you don't know if it's going to turn into a company. And we don't like putting undue pressure on a team to build something that it was never meant to be. So I like to use the term projects. It's like, we're going to fund these projects that have the potential to become a startup. We love to fund things that are especially heavy in R&D because those types of projects have a much harder time getting early stage capital. But that's going to be really interesting for us to figure out, okay, teams, two college students who were building a battery technology company. And actually, they were able to use that funding to then apply for larger grants like I-Corps and DARPA and SBIR and things like this. And they've started getting some pilot contracts with customers, and we've come in for more money with that team. And so we really want to replicate that with this new program. But it was very risky for us to do that 50K check up front just because, the chance of a harder technology working out compared to even something like software is very low. But we love to be able to support teams to do this. And like the worst case scenario is that the team learns a lot and we learn a lot. And then the team moves on to whatever is next for them, whether that's school or another project or whatever it is. We know as investors, I was talking to someone yesterday and they were saying, gosh, that it was so refreshing to hear this. We know it's our job to make a lot of decisions, and it's also the responsibility is on us to be wrong a lot. So I think you always hear these stories from founders that are like, oh, my investors are really mad at me because I didn't return money. It's like the person that investor needs to be mad at is themselves, because it's their job to make good decisions and to accept responsibility for the fate of those decisions. And a lot of people are not good at that, but we are constantly telling our founders like, hey, if this thing is not working, we want you to move on to what's next, especially since we work with younger people. It's really important to us that you get onto the thing that you're supposed to be doing in the world, and it might not be the thing you're doing right now. So, we also sort of consider ourselves almost like mentors or guidance counselors to say like, hey, listen, this thing's not working. It's time to move on, and let's figure out what that is. So let's
maybe if you put questions in the chat, we can just read them out loud. And
yeah, we can do that too, or you can say them out loud, whatever you want.
Okay.
You should be able to unmute your mics, and don't worry if you feel like your questions are silly. There is no silly questions.
Yeah, no, not at all.
I don't imagine many of you have thought much about investment or done anything to do with that. So it's a perfect opportunity to ask some questions and to learn a little bit more.
It looks like, Aaron, you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you so much for this talk. It was really interesting. I was curious about there's a lot of like discussion about diversity in tech and in VC funding specifically. And like last year, 85% of VC funds went to all male teams. So like, what do you say to that? And what do you say to like a prospective female founder?
Yeah, absolutely. I say come talk to us. 1517 has been very good at supporting a more diverse set of founders. I think part of it is that we're a diverse team. Female GPs only make up something like 9% of investors. So I think that helps. We have a very, like, accessibility is one of our core values at 1517. So it's like we have a contact form and we take a phone call, not just like email respond, but a phone call with like 90% of the people who write into our contact form. We build a lot of community. We have a super active Facebook group. There's all kinds of different ways that we engage people. In fact, I was going through our Facebook group the other day, and it was really interesting to me. Like, I'd love to like just go through our, last 100 posts and see like, okay, like how many people are like diverse founders who are posting in our group. Really great, and we're not doing anything to make that happen other than being accessible and bringing more people to type of community. 30% founders who are underrepresented in the venture community. We're always looking to increase that. I think our fund too is actually a higher percent than that. I just haven't done the math yet. And in fact, it's kind of interesting because sometimes I'll assume that a founder doesn't hit that metric, and then a year or two later they'll be like, oh yeah, by the way, like, my mom is from Brazil, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know you were Brazilian. Like, bizarre. So for us, like, we probably need to also just do some better tracking on some of this, because we don't ask ask people their gender, we don't ask people necessarily like race or where they're from, but just on at least what I can get at an eyeball level of like, okay, I think this is where we're at with our portfolio. We sit at about 30%, and I think Fund 2 is actually probably going to be even higher than that.
I'll say a couple things here. I think Danielle said 2 heads are better than 1. I think it's like we're even stronger as a team that we are male and female, because we bring different perspectives to our evaluations, and we complement each other. It infuses our skill set in a way that sometimes is hard to articulate, but sometimes it's like, founders come to trust Danielle much quicker than they trust me. She's able to build rapport. If they have life problems, she's very good at talking them through those. And I can sometimes be...
I don't know though. Michael underplays himself. I say that sometimes, especially young men in our community, will go to Michael and I'll say, "Oh, you're like the home for wayward wanderers."
Yeah. But in some ways, we also break the gendered stereotypes, because I'm known for being stuck in the cloud of ideas, and Danielle is the meanest, toughest negotiator I've ever met.
Not mean. But I am the negotiator.
Yeah. It is so obvious that one day we were pitching Peter Thiel, and I'm talking about higher education problems, and then he's like, okay, and he turns to Danielle and he says, well, we know he doesn't like talking business. How much money do you need?
Wow. I was like, I can't believe that just happened. We were actually on an investor call recently, 2 weeks ago, where we were pitching a potential investor for our fund, and it was really funny because Michael brought up this like, oh, Danielle's the negotiator type. And I was like, I'm keeping my mouth shut on this call. And we get off the call and I call Michael and I say, yeah, that guy wanted to put 200K into our fund, but I worked him up to 250. and I was like, but Michael didn't know that. So I don't know what the investor was thinking afterwards. Like, oh yeah, she totally.
Oh, funny. But then we do see stereotypes at play in the world, and maybe this is something as a society we have to work on. Just anecdotally, when we're on campuses taking office hours, the male people who come in, they're just like, I'm the fucking shit. Here are 3 pitches, and they're all amazing. Boom, boom, boom.
It's not. This is like
that's an exaggeration. But then we'll notice some women will come in and they're a little bit slower to warm up to tell us. This is not
an exaggeration. What Michael's about to say is not an exaggeration.
Where it's like, hey, they'll talk to us about Silicon Valley. What do we see? That kind of stuff. And then when their hand is on the door on the way out, they'll say, oh, I do have one little idea.
So for us, what that has informed us on is not that, that informs how we interact, depending on who walks in the door. So when a woman walks in the door, our first question, and we have this as standard operating procedure amongst the whole team, is, hey, tell us about what you're working on. Because women will not tell us what they're working on until the end of the meeting, whereas men will they will just start slamming stuff at the beginning of the meeting. And so it's really interesting to us to see those differences. But for us, when we see those differences, we don't just put our hands up and say, oh, I guess there's a difference. We say, okay, what do we do to make that difference disappear? And it's like, oh, okay, we have to ask women different questions than we ask men. And we institute that as a practice at 1517.
Great. Cool. So has anyone else got any other questions? Feel free to type them in chat if you don't want to unmute your microphone, or you can unmute your microphone like Erin did and just ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
I must say,
I don't know if this is exactly...
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know if this is exactly a question, but I've noticed that some companies, like sort of Docker or NPM, are companies where, like, mostly they're building sort of open source stuff, but they don't seem to make very much money. Like, NPM ran, 2 billion downloads. I can't remember what year it was, but most of those were for free, and they didn't make money off. And the same with Docker, right? Where, like, the core product is open source, and they're not, like, inherently, they don't seem to be very profitable. Like, I don't know exactly what the question is, but I'm just curious about, like, how funding for those companies works.
I think there was a trend in startups and VCs, call it over the last 15 years, where companies like Amazon and Facebook, going back that far, it was a long time before they had revenue and then profit. Amazon by choice, because they plowed everything back into R&D. Facebook, because it was like, wow, we have this intense user engagement. We don't want to hurt the product. How are we going to make money? And then they finally became an ad network. But that, that success, I think, then fueled the business models of the next decade, where you saw this, and this became problematic with companies like WeWork, where the promise was that if we burn through a lot of cash now and acquire a lot of customers, what we lose in the margins, we're going to gain in the volume. So it's like, hey, if we just conquer the world, we'll have so many customers that it won't matter that our margins are so small. And VCs bought that, and they just plowed money into these companies, thinking that one day they'd be profitable. And then reality set in, and it turns out that it was much harder than they thought. So, I'm not surprised sometimes when, even to this day, like sometimes engagement and user base can really drive investment and market share. But I think it's going to become rarer and rarer. We have a company in our portfolio, for instance, it's called Loom, and they're just crushing it. It's a company to me that is one of these where it's like, wow, the engagement and usage is just intense, but they're only now building up their business model. So I don't know. It's a great question because our bias is to say that revenue is the oxygen and lifeblood of any company, and that's going to put that should really determine the value of a company. If you get to Wall Street post IPO, those investment bank analysts, when they try to evaluate a company, then they're looking at the revenue and how it relates to the whole industry. So to us, that's what we stick with. As soon as you get into the dark arts of, oh my God, this is going to be awesome in 5 years, look at this engagement, I think it gets kind of tricky. I'll end there.
That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Covered it, nailed it.
Maybe one last thing on that though, is if you do have an idea and you feel like it's going to be a user engagement based idea, just run with it and go as far as you can. If you don't worry too much about monetizing some kind of user base right away, especially on a consumer product.
Other questions?
Hopefully that helped. Anyone else got any questions or any thoughts, anything like that?
Well, okay. One thing we'll say is we're really accessible. Everyone who's on this call and anyone who isn't in your cohort, feel free to reach out to us over email. Danielle's email is Danielle@5th. There you go, and I'll type mine. You just send us an email.
I got you.
You should also be able to find, I'll put these in the calendar event, so you'll be able to find those there as well.
Okay, great. And we're on socials and all that. You can follow us there. We have a forum on our website. We're happy to do one-on-one conversations with any of you to deepen this engagement here. If you want to pitch us ideas, we'd love to hear that. We also have a community you might be interested in. It's a great way to bounce ideas off people who are like yourself. So
yeah, actually, if you happen to be on Facebook, because it is on Facebook, it's 1517 Community. You can add yourself there, and it'll ask who have you talked to. Just put one of us, and we'll know that we were on this call together. But yeah, that's a super active, engaged group.
I had a small question.
Yeah, please.
So basically, in all of these social networking sites, there has been like a lot of talk of privacy in the past year. But like it is known that all the other social networking sites who tried to launch promising privacy were either not scalable or they were like just not able to go ahead with their products. So
Sure.
as VCs, what do you guys think about like investing in like alternatives for existing social networking platforms, and what are your personal opinions about it?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. I mean, we said earlier that we do very little consumer, and this is the exact sort of David and Goliath issue that a startup that's working in the social space would have to overcome. And we even see this on a small scale. Like a lot of people who build apps, they're like, hey, I'm building this great app. And I'm like, yeah, this app is amazing, but that's not what you have to solve. What you have to solve for is engagement and how to get eyeballs on this. And I said, the killer app is the app that helps people to get eyeballs on their product. And no one's really cracked that nut. So you can build something absolutely beautiful and amazing. I mean, think of it like artwork. If like, if you have a Monet in the basement and no one can go see it, like it doesn't really matter. Maybe there's like something that matters in terms of like building your skill set and that, you're sort of thriving in that way. But in the entrepreneurship space, you need to get people using your product. And I think that's just very difficult on social right now. But that said, Peter Thiel is quoted from, I think it was like 10 years ago. I think, people were asking him about like, because like mobile wasn't as big a deal. And I can't, Michael, you can help me with this quote probably. I think he said like the mobile of Facebook is Facebook, right? Something like that.
That's right.
Yeah. But what he did not foresee was things like TikTok and Snapchat and like all these other things. And so, for us, like it would be very hard for us to evaluate new social platforms, but there are funds out there like BetaWorks is a consumer-oriented fund, Montage is a consumer-oriented fund, and I assume that they have a thesis for how they would pick and choose. I have no idea how that would work.
But a strategic point here.
Yeah.
I think it's a bold idea that if you can do it, you should do it because the world is dying. They want this, but I think the key problem is that the whole internet right now is based on the same business model. Google, Facebook especially, is based on advertising because they don't know how to make money otherwise. And so if you can solve the advertising problem, if you can solve the business model that doesn't require advertising as revenue, and build a social network that's attractive on top of it, then you're going to solve the privacy issues. The only reason big data is a problem, the tracking, surveillance, fake news, clickbait, all of that is tied to getting eyeballs to look at ads. If you change the business model, you change those problems. So that's why, especially with new social networks, some people are excited about using, Ethereum or some other blockchain because they think that by building a social network on that platform, you can get people to pay for things a lot easier and have it be decentralized in a way. I'm not sure the computation is there yet. It's not fast enough, but yeah, try to strike at that central business model. If you can do that and build something that people engage with, I think you might have something that can take down one of the giants.
Thank you.
Great. So we've got about 5-10 minutes left. We've had some really good questions so far. Has anyone else got any other questions they'd like to ask or thoughts or anything to do with the stuff we've discussed today. While we're waiting, I do want to thank both of you for taking the time to talk to us today. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure all of the fellows, Swift agreed, it's also had a really good time, even though he was only here for half of it. But I think everyone's definitely there's a few claps. Everyone's really enjoyed this.
Yeah, happy to talk. Thanks for having us.